We have a lot going on at Renegade University. First of all, we have 3 webinars that are coming up soon in September. We have the Instructional Design for Dying with Tom Nickel, Deleuze and Guattari, taught by Daniel Coffeen, and The War on Beauty in the 21st Century, taught by Jack, the Perfume Nationalist. Also, October 8th to the 10th is the freedom event of the year. It's Renegade University Weekend in Texas, Lockhart to be specific. We will have Scott Horton, Cody Wilson, Deirdre McCluskey, Hotep Jesus, and Jack the Perfume Nationalist joining me, Buck Johnson, and Paloma Verde CBD, who are the sponsors of RU Texas. So go to renegadeuniversity.com/Texas for more information and to get your tickets to the freedom event of the year. I hope to see you in class and in Lockhart. This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. My guest this week is incorrigibly curious and skeptical, which is why he is one of the last journalists in America. This is my interview with Michael Tracy. I am joined from London, England by, I keep calling you this, but it's just true, pretty much. The last journalist in America, Michael Tracy. Thanks for coming back on the show, Michael. You don't go by Mike ever, do you?
You know, I've gone by Mike and Michael interchangeably throughout my entire life in different contexts.
Good.
So I respond to both. Like if you shout one of the two at me, there's a decent chance I will react.
Okay. So
but I appreciate the introduction though, because it reminds me of The Only Living Boy in New York, Simon and Garfunkel song. I feel like I should retool that to like tout myself as the only living journalist or something. That would be very humble of me.
It would. Well, it's just objectively true. So, I mean, you're not the only, I think there's like...
The only living journalist on Twitter.
There's Glenn Greenwald. In terms of people who do actual reporting at all, who else is there? So now you're on Substack, which is the place where real journalists go. And now it's you and Glenn and a handful of other people. There's a few others out there. I mean, there's essayists like Freddie DeBoer.
Matt Taibbi, I would put in that category. Yeah,
there you go. Taibbi's definitely there. Okay. The 3 of you. Elite company, but it's it's a very small group. So Substack.
Well, I mean, the reporting element there, I think, is worth dwelling upon because I'm as much of a sucker for a well-argued, I guess, opinion column as anybody else, and I do that on occasion. But I like to at least think that I'm incorporating actual journalistic insights now and then, so it's not just pure pontificating.
Right.
And, you know, again, not to even detract from pure pontificating if it's well suited to a particular topic or if the person has actually valuable insight. But at least what I try to do is strive to add some reporting around the margins so that I'm not I'm like producing something new into the atmosphere.
Yeah. And these days, journalism, real reporting used to be about calling up sources on the phone and interviewing them on the phone and then transcribing that and quoting it in your piece. But nowadays, I think it includes finding information that's out there that's available already, but that no one knows about.
Yeah, like almost being a curator.
Yes, right.
Because I mean, the average person, even if they think that they're a relatively sophisticated news consumer, doesn't have the wherewithal or the desire or the resources to sift through the avalanche of information that's being, flooded into their consciousnesses every day.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they come to rely on others who have a journalistic disposition who can sift through some of that and package it in a way that's comprehensible. So that's in a way I think a kind of reporting. I mean, that's what I.F. Stone did. He also did reporting on his own right, but his newsletter, he actually had a Substack before. It was Substack.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
He had a physical newsletter that was sent out that people purchased subscriptions to, and a lot of it was him reading the newspapers every day. Yep. And highlighting stuff that might have otherwise been gone unnoticed, and adding his breadth of information to like an analytical spin on it that people appreciated. So I'm not going to compare myself to I.F. Stone, but I think there's something similar going on here with Substack, and even that was sort of the utility in a lot of ways of the early blogosphere.
Mm-hmm.
But now those kind of modes of analysis have all merged into something that I think could be reasonably described as journalism, even if, as you mentioned, it's not a matter of just like going into work at 10 o'clock every morning and like making blind phone calls to your operative friends. And, I'll talk to operatives and stuff or others in the political realm. But it's usually not a function of me just reaching out to them because I'm desperate for a story by deadline.
Yeah.
It's because they feel like I'm, somebody that they can rely upon to at least be somewhat discerning and somewhat fair in my kind of rendering of whatever it is that they want to be out there. So I think I don't know how I would advise people to do this, but if you can enter a situation where people are coming to you and because they have some confidence in your judgment, then that leads itself to some good stories and some good reportage that I think is often better than just being a hack who has to, satisfy his editors once a day and come up with something that's fleeting and usually ultimately inconsequential.
Yeah, I think that's how Glenn Greenwald became who he is in a sense. He became so trustworthy. Didn't Edward Snowden approach him, I believe?
Yeah, he did. Yeah. And Greenwald famously at first didn't know how to receive encrypted email.
Right.
So, and at first I think he even like refused or was very resistant to even learning how to open encrypted email or to receive the information that Snowden gave him. And he had to kind of be badgered into it.
Yeah.
But that was because, Snowden was a longtime reader of his blog then at Salon.
There it is.
And the Guardian. And yeah, so he cultivated sort of unbeknownst to him a certain trust in this explosive source who then sought him out. And you'll even see people occasionally criticizing Greenwald saying, oh, well, you didn't actually do anything to get that scoop. That just fell into your lap. Well, no, he put in years and years of work to sort of cultivate this reputation as someone who is trustworthy and who would be responsible in his handling of that information. So he did put in work, quote unquote, but just not in the traditional sense, which is why for the longest time, journalists were so infuriated at him because he was surpassing them in terms of importance without even pretending to go through any of these kind of more established channels to create like a journalistic platform for himself.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're going to end up there. Maybe you already have ended up there. I think you're going to be at that position soon where people will be coming to you. Major people will coming to you with stories because you're building exactly that reputation. Someone who is a journalist first, in my view. You believe in journalism in your heart, and that is I guess that's really all that's separating you in a sense from the people who work at the New York Times or at CNN. They obviously, journalism is a secondary concern or none at all. They're concerned with partisan interests. They're interested in changing the world in specific ways, politically. And that is the mission. I mean, it's basically been stated by the New York Times editorial board and the Washington Post editorial board. And it's certainly obviously the position of the CNN editors, whoever they are, Jeff Zucker on down. But that's what I don't see anymore. I don't see people who are employed as journalists talking about journalistic ethics. That used to be a thing where on a regular basis you would hear reporters at the mainstream outlets talking about what it means to be a journalist, journalistic ethics, the putting aside partisan interests for basically curiosity, and trying to just report what they find and letting that dictate what they report. What they find dictates what they report, rather than going into it with a particular political agenda. Of course, I don't believe in objectivity, so I'm not using that kind of word. I think it's ridiculous. But yeah, there's a curiosity, I guess, that's at the heart of it. For me, is that true for you? Are you just a curious person? Is that what makes you different from the people who work at the New York Times?
Well, I'm sure there are plenty of perfectly nice people at the New York Times who would regard themselves as curious people, right?
Sure.
But clearly their attachment to that institutional ethos sometimes precludes them from following through their curiosities to the point where it becomes reportable or publishable information that counteracts or contravenes a certain preordained narrative. It's interesting because you mentioned that journalism is kind of like what I believe in. It almost sounds corny, but more and more that is what I believe in, because I'll often get asked to describe my political worldview or to, outline what it is that my ideal political program would be. And more, I'm just sort of bored with the question because I find it more interesting to kind of adhere to this philosophy of almost like empiricism, which goes hand in hand with journalism, right? But if you adhere to empiricism, that sort of compels you to cut through nonsense and be evidence-based and be grounded in logic and not really have much invested in this or that political program. Now, I have opinions, and when I'm asked to elaborate on those opinions, I don't shy away from doing that. I've never believed, like you neither, also apparently never did, in the kind of old-fashioned, stodgy doctrine of objectivity.
Oh, no.
I mean, that was always a farce.
Right.
But it does seem like, particularly in the post-2016 era, there's been this incredible overcorrection. And I think you and I have even maybe talked about this on previous discussions that we've had. But that overcorrection has led to a point where journalists seem to be content to jettison any fidelity to kind of like an impartial evaluation of facts and evidence, and a rejection of becoming too immersed in a certain like narrative styling that then dominates everything you produce or write about or report. So that overcorrection, I think, leaves an opening for people who are more of my, I guess, mindset, where, I don't really care if you're going to attack me as whether, this week it's being a white nationalist apologist or a Trump and, anti-Trump kind of partisan or something, or the following week, then I'll make a liberal pansy or whatever. None of that really bothers me because I'm not going to allow myself to become in hock to whatever the fashions are on, social media. Part of that's due to my lack of institutional connection, that in the sense that I don't rely on any one institution for my livelihood. And if you do, I mean, that just, I think, inherently influences the calculations you make on a day-to-day basis, even if you're not conscious of it.
Correct.
But I've always had a streak where I just knew that was not going to be the correct fit for me. Even when I've kind of sucked it up and worked within the confines of particular institutions, still I had that kind of underlying instinct where it kind of occurred to me, maybe this is not fully sustainable for the long run, and I should try to go out on my own and just let the chips fall where they may. But yeah, I mean, I think there's something valuable about. I mean, it almost makes you want to be nostalgic for an older generation of journalists who, for all their faults and for all like the phony pretenses around objectivity, nonetheless, I mean, just not tolerating bullshit seemed to be, for a lot of these guys and some gals, their kind of guiding impetus.
Right.
And if that's that, I'm perfectly okay with that being like my de facto ideology, because, you know, I'm not drafting like party platforms, and I'm not like I'm not selling my wares to political candidates. Right. So I'm doing something else, which is trying to, you know, play referee, but not such that I'm arbitrarily withholding my true views on things. I always strove to be maximally transparent about that kind of stuff. Unlike a lot of these journalists now at the New York Times who are crusaders for whatever the latest social justice cause is. So they've gone in a completely different direction. I've always been transparent, but now I'm transparently just saying that, look, this is my role is to try to process the news cycle for people in a way that strikes them as intelligible and isn't bound by any of these kind of strictures of these kind of moralizing forces who run most institutions. And if that causes me to run up against a liberal institution or a conservative institution, I don't really care. Whereas a lot of people, I mean, their entire kind of self-identity hinges on who they make upset. Well, I say, you know, I'm happy to have enemies for the right reasons.
Yeah. Moralizing forces are making journalism these days. And you are not a moralizing force. And your institutional independence, I think, is crucial to this. But I think there's something deeper, and I don't want to psychoanalyze you. I've tried this a few times, but I'm going to do it anyway.
With me or with others?
You. Well, I do it with everyone, but with you. We don't even have to, this doesn't even have to be psychoanalysis, but the first time I interviewed you, which was the first time I ever talked to you, was in January of 2017 in Midtown Manhattan.
Yeah.
And we were just a few blocks from Trump Tower. And it was...
I was in Trump Tower that day.
Were you?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
I mean, I was just kind of looking around, you know, goofily. I didn't have like an appointment or anything, but because I was in the vicinity, I went in. Yeah.
That's funny. And you, at that time, it was apparent, didn't have the emotional reaction to Trump that seemingly everyone in the New York Times newsroom has had. And I think that is also the big difference between you and them. You're not a fan of Trump. You never were. You were critical of him in all sorts of ways, always have been, but you didn't see it as an existential crisis. You didn't feel morally obligated to make up stories to take him down, to quote unnamed sources repeatedly to take him down, to do whatever it took to take him down, right? You just never had that feeling, which clearly has been animating newsrooms all over the country and all over the world since 2016. That's correct. Am I right about that? In my description?
Yeah, and it even kind of animates newsrooms now in this kind of like bastardized ex post facto variation, where like the looming specter of Trump or like a Trumpist bursting onto the scene like dictates how they organize their news coverage and like what their moral commitments supposedly are. But I think that is true. But I also think, you know, you would see these journalists having psychological meltdowns about Trump, where they're just emoting with the most histrionic possible language about the dire existential threat that he allegedly poses, and how this needs to like fundamentally upend all our previous assumptions about what the function of journalism is, what the media should be doing. Throw everything into the trash can in terms of prior assumptions. We're in this whole new world now, and we have to deal with this extremely acute threat. And if you have that kind of emotional reaction to a political figure and you work in the media, maybe you ought to be spending more time in therapy than in journalism. because you're almost proud of allowing your emotions and your kind of knee-jerk reflexes to overcome you, and to thereby, you'd think, cloud your judgment. If you're in like an emotionally histrionic state and you're broadcasting that on social media, is that supposed to give us confidence that you have like any kind of faculty of discernment left, or that you are, weighing competing claims to try to arrive at the best approximation of the truth in your coverage, or that you have any other reasoning capability that would seem to be inherent to the whole endeavor of journalism? Probably not. Probably you need somebody to, like, I don't know, give you a therapy dog and a lollipop or something. I don't know, because like you're not behaving in a way that exudes, professionalism. And not that everybody has to be like totally professional at all times, and everybody has emotions, but they were all but so much of the media was almost like impressed with themselves for losing all restraint because of Trump. And it's just like, okay, and suddenly became like a contrarian thing to not become like a blithering basket case because of a beauty pageant proprietor. Like, it shouldn't. None of this was like that. It wasn't rocket science to figure out that the media was misbehaving in this way, or not even aware that they were misbehaving in this way, because they were so enthralled to whatever the moral panic was. But clearly, there weren't enough people within these institutions to raise a red flag. And so, I don't think I had a visceral reaction to Trump. And people will say, oh, that's because you're not a person of color, or you're not a minority,
right,
or you're not some kind of discriminated against religious group or whatever.
Right.
And therefore, like, why should you have felt that kind of visceral fear? Because nothing was ever going to threaten you. Well, okay, but on top of that, okay, I can't control my inborn characteristics. Yeah, fantastic point. But on top of that, you were also catastrophizing and saying like that the American Republic was on the verge of literal collapse.
Yep.
And that a fascist had taken control of the government and was instituting like a nationwide network of concentration camps. And that also, oh, by the way, the Kremlin had orchestrated a coup and was now in either direct or indirect, I mean, it's never quite clear, control of like the apparatus of state. So that also would affect me regardless of my skin pigmentation. And therefore, I think it's within my right to object to your incredible hysteria that almost never was borne out in the facts in terms of what was actually done by Trump. I mean, Trump essentially was a president who presided over the Republican professional class, but with a different kind of communications bent, where he was tweeting up a storm, he was cracking jokes, he was always causing controversy, whether he personally stoked it or whether it was his enemy stoking it. So the communications domain of the presidency was radically altered by Trump, but on a policy level, not a whole lot that was fundamental change, or at least not enough that would at all retroactively justify these incredibly, disproportionate declarations that we all had to be running around with our hair on fire. I mean, really, was corporate tax cuts like this apocalyptic scenario ushered in by this newfound fascist movement? Probably not. I mean, I think an actual committed fascist or a white nationalist or whatever maybe would have prioritized something other than like what the Chamber of Commerce wanted from every Republican administration. So, I mean, that's the thing. None of it bore out. I mean, none of the hysteria actually came to fruition. I don't think. I mean, I would love to debate somebody actually who believes that it did come to fruition, and then we could actually get into the details. But, that's actually the American. I mean, the other funny thing is that the American overseas footprint actually receded under Trump.
That's right.
Whereas it had expanded under Obama. Yep. Not that Trump was like this, pure-hearted dove who, was just so emotionally troubled by all the destruction that the U.S. military had wrought the world over. But, his whole kind of transactional style of diplomacy and foreign policy decision making did result in, fewer troops deployed overseas than when he took office. And no new wars created. I don't think that's a particularly high benchmark to reach. Right. Didn't start a new war on false pretenses, but compared with some of his predecessors, it was an improvement in that one regard. Yeah. So where does that all factor into this, fascism related bloviating that we were all so consumed with for so long? It just wasn't even taken into account at all, I don't think. And so much of that was just the BS, like projections of this neurotic liberal / neoconservative elite who needed to derive meaning from a political figure like Trump occupying such an outsized presence in their lives because they had lost other interests, I guess. And therefore they subjected the rest of us to their ridiculous neuroses. And that I think explains a lot of it.
Well done. Yes. Very harsh depiction of journalists, but accurate in my view. For more than a year, I'm proud to say, Paloma Verde CBD has been the main sponsor of the Unregistered podcast. We have helped them grow, and they have helped us grow as well. So, to get the best deals on CBD you will ever find, which is 25% off every product in the Paloma Verde CBD store, go to palomaverdecbd.com, use the discount code RENEGADE, 25% off everything. Then, if you get the unregistered combo pack, otherwise known as the THAD pack, that's 33% off, but check out what you get in there. In the combo pack, you get my favorite delicious fruit-flavored gummies, 10 milligrams of CBD in each gummy. You get their soft gels, that's 25 milligrams of CBD in each soft gel, and their high-potency, fast-acting tincture. I put some drops under my tongue, and my anxiety just melts away, and it helps me beautifully with sleep at night. So again, go to palomaverdecbd.com, use the discount code RENEGADE, get 25% off everything in the store, 33% off the unregistered combo pack, otherwise known as the THAD pack. I think your body's going to feel a lot better. I think your life's going to be better, and I thank you. So yes, they originally, to be fair, I guess you could say, they originally believed in their hearts that Trump was Hitler, and I suppose there was a little bit of evidence that might support that presumption. But anyway, he turned out to very much not be Hitler, as you just said. And you've only talked about a few of his policies. But if you just look at the policies, I mean, the material consequences of Trump's actions as policies, it's a very ordinary presidency. And from a left-wing perspective, you might say it's slightly better than average, actually. I mean,
for a Republican anyway, yeah.
Certainly. I mean, he deported, the thing he was supposedly worst on, immigration. He deported fewer people than Obama did, quite a few. And
under Trump, fewer miles of newly constructed border barrier were built than under Obama.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, wow.
So so there was more new wall, because, and Trump supporters who are like hardcore MAGA people will counter by saying, oh, well, Trump fortified pre-existing wall. Okay. Well, he fortified pre-existing wall in terms of new territory that was covered by barrier on the southern border. More of that was erected newly under Obama than Trump. Now, chew on that one.
I did not know that. That's amazing. I mean, a lot of people know about Obama.
Another one of my favorite factoids is that in the budget that Trump signed into law in 2019, there was more money allocated to aid to Israel than to southern border enforcement. And this was supposed to be Trump who, remember when he first entered office, there was this scare about him you might even forget this because it all gets lost in one's memory because we were so suffused with these nonsense controversies that were almost entirely manufactured. But there was this supposed scandal about how Trump didn't issue a correctly worded statement on Holocaust Remembrance Day.
Yeah.
And that was supposed to be evidence that he harbored these anti-Semitic
Right.
beliefs. No, really. I mean, this was alleged. I have the receipts. Like I can go back and pull up the screenshots and everything.
Totally.
And then, I would sometimes hear from leftists who would say, oh, well, I have this very elaborate, interpretive paradigm where I alone understand that being the most, bullishly pro-Israel president in history, which Trump proudly bragged that he was, that is somehow also perfectly consistent with him being a secret anti-Semite.
Right. I know.
Like leftists actually thought that they had like an eminently reasonable explanation for why that made total sense.
Just sit with that for a second, everybody. I hadn't even thought about that. Right. Of course, he's probably the most pro-Israel. Certainly no one's been more pro-Israel than Trump has been, right?
Well, he bragged about it in exactly those terms. I mean, it was a pretty nakedly political push for Jewish voters in like South Florida or something, but that's what he said he was.
And they always suspected him of being, or accused him of being, an anti-Semite with his very Jewish son-in-law too. But and also he became like his chief patron ended up being Sheldon Adelson. Right.
I actually covered an event where Sheldon Adelson was the keynote speaker in 2014 that Ted Cruz was at because he was trying to court Sheldon Adelson because he was preparing to run for president in 2016 and he wanted him to be his benefactor. And at that event, it was explained. I mean, it was just incredible. At that event, it was so awkward that they seated Ted Cruz right next to Adelson so they could have like a banter or something. And at that event, it was explained to me because I had been mispronouncing Adelson's name as Adelson.
Me too.
And the way like one of the Jewish attendees at this event explained to me to remember how to pronounce it was because it's not Adelson, it's Adelson because you could just think he's adding up his money. And I love these photos of Adelson like wearing, he's dead now, but before he died, his like corpse like semi-sentient body would have atop his head this Trump "Make America Great Again" yarmulke. And this is the guy, and this is the guy who it was just taken as an article of faith for the longest time was an out and out anti-Semite who wanted to be the second coming of Hitler and exterminate the Jews. I mean, who knows anymore? It was just it was just a mishmash of BS that there was no even incentive to keep it all straight or make a coherent case out of it.
Can we ever hold them accountable? I mean, the entire Trump presidency, I wanted someone to just catalog every claim that was made about what he was going to do by the establishment media and by academics, by the way. And you think you're disgusted by your profession? Oh my goodness. I mean, the way that academics have dealt with this, Timothy Snyder at Yale, very big time historian in my field. He's one of the biggest people in my field in history.
I think he's one of the most destructive forces in all of this because he kind of gave this veneer, of like intellectual sophistication to the incredibly reductive and stupid kind of fascism interpretation of the post 2016 era.
Yeah.
So if you're like a savvy New York Times reader and you saw one of his video op-eds, then suddenly that entitled you to speak with like historical precision about how we're living through, the next iteration of the Third Reich.
And Snyder's field is Nazism. That's what he studies. That's what he's written about is Nazism. And he could sit there and look out at Donald Trump and the presidency and say that this was somehow consistent. Really wild. And then also, he absolutely believes in his heart of hearts that Putin still controls this country. Even under Joe Biden. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, because they're lurking, the agents for Putin are lurking underneath society. So they're either pulling the strings behind the scenes or they're getting ready to, but Putin basically owns this country since Trump.
Yeah. The online troll armies in St. Petersburg could just be unleashed at any time. And all of a sudden we're back to where we started in 2016. And, there's, collusion all around us.
And Jonathan Rauch, him?
I once met him and I liked one of his books, but seems to have gone off the deep end.
Sure. I just heard him just a couple weeks ago, talking as if Russiagate had never been debunked. Like he was as full on Russiagate hysteric as anybody has ever been, just detailing all the ways in which Putin controls American society. I don't know what to do, because yes, he's written really great books about civil liberties and freedom of speech, and
Kindly Inquisitors, I think was one
yeah, right. You know,
yeah.
he's always seemed like a very rational, level-headed kind of guy, and then
he was like in. It's weird because you never know how where the chips fall, right, on this sort of thing. Because he was involved in like libertarian circles.
Yeah,
like that's how I met him when I went to like one of these conferences back in the day. Not because I was a card-carrying libertarian or anything, but because some of them liked me when they invite me to stuff.
Yeah,
and that's where he was, and like that entire the libertarian movement circle, like late 2000s, early 2010s, seemed to also be another casualty of the Trump era, in that it's splintered, but not really on any recognizable ideological basis, but more around like what was your interpretation of Trump. So it's sort of weird because in a way it's arbitrary, because it's like divorced from any philosophical undergirding, right? It's more about like, what is your instinct? What is your kind of just base psychological reaction to this?
It's about your morality.
This thing that's entered the system. Yeah.
It's about your morality, right? The problem is that you never felt morally obligated to attack Trump. And that's my problem too, right? That we never felt that moral obligation to claim that he was Hitler and to do whatever it took to bring him down. They all feel like it's a moral obligation because he's a fundamentally evil person.
But at the same time, I felt that my resistance to just haphazardly criticizing him or attacking him at any available opportunity, I thought that actually strengthened my critiques of Trump when I did choose to level them more sparingly, maybe than the average pundit or something.
Of course.
But that kind of, and I would even hear that from Trump supporters, right? They would say, look, I basically trust that you're fair-minded on this, and you're not just hyper reactive and just some sort of emotionally unstable Twitter journalist with the personality disorder. And therefore, when you have a criticism of Trump, or you have a point to make that maybe highlights a shortcoming that I hadn't considered, I'm going to actually take that seriously. Whereas if I had just behaved like the herd, they would have tuned that out.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I did the same thing, where when I didn't like something, which was often, I would lay it out. His economic policies, I think, were absolutely idiotic in all sorts of ways. And his attack on Syria was terrible. And immigration, of course, I fundamentally disagree with him on all that. And so, yeah, the power of my argument, I believe, holds more weight when people know that I'm not a hysteric.
Yeah, I've even pulled up, on that note, recently, because I was writing about Afghanistan, I pulled up a tweet that I did from August of 2017 when Trump was snookered by his generals, or the adults in the room, to authorize yet another surge in Afghanistan, which wasn't as bad as Obama's, because it wasn't aimed at like a counterinsurgency strategy, but nonetheless, it was another surge. More U.S. military personnel were sent to Afghanistan, and he increased aerial bombardment. And I highlighted, I don't know if you read any of my recent Substacks on it, but in that tweet, it shows that like the actual wordage used by Trump to justify this surge was very eerily almost identical to the wordage that Obama used in 2009 after a incredibly similar set of circumstances, where he had, it wasn't as on the forefront of the public awareness by 2017, but nonetheless, it was this whole thing where we have to reevaluate our Afghanistan strategy as a new administration, and the generals are all united behind this one position. And at the time, it was like, Mattis, who had just left the military to enter the civilian leadership, but he was still regarded as this general. And Trump and Obama, they kind of, they couldn't be more different temperamentally, if that's only really what you're analyzing, which unfortunately is what a lot of just the media and the general public only thinks about when they think about both presidents, is their temperament, their rhetorical style, like how they make you feel. Like they're this character in your lives or something, where and they're part of like this self-directed narrative that you're just coming along the ride for. But when the rubber hits the road and they have to make a policy decision on Afghanistan, and then they have to justify that for the wider populace, and they have speechwriters writing down the words that they'll enunciate on TV to explain their decision, it's almost the exact same. It's incredible. I wish I had the quotes in front of me, but it was like our commitment is not an open-ended one, and Obama said that, and like Trump made this like don't believe that our commitment is open-ended. Like it was like just mixing a few words around it. It was the exact same speech.
So what's your hypothesis about that? I mean, to me, I would say that's evidence for the military industrial complex thesis, right? That is this constant blob that directs foreign policy in this country, that individual presidents end up not being important or not important at all. No matter what they think coming into office, they will have to follow the dictates of Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. Is that how you take that? I mean, if his speech about his surge in Afghanistan was rhetorically the same as Obama's speech about his surge in Afghanistan, that would indicate, right, that there's some constant presence that is actually writing foreign policy, not the presidents themselves.
I actually pulled up the quotes here so people know that I'm not exaggerating.
Yeah.
Obama in 2009, quote, "As your commander-in-chief, I owe you a mission that is clearly defined." Trump, 2017, "From now on, victory will have a clear definition." Obama, 2009, "The days of providing a blank check are over." Trump, 2017, our commitment is not unlimited and our support is not a blank check."
Oh my God.
So it's like they were saying the same thing. And I think I do think the president actually has a lot of agency. So there can be a temptation when you're talking about the malign influence of the military industrial complex or the defense contracting firms, which obviously hire armies of lobbyists and have huge influence on DC. I was actually I haven't written about this yet, and I don't know exactly what I'll do with it, but I can, I'll just give you a little bit of a snippet. I went to many times a year, what's called these defense industry trade groups hold conferences where you can go and, it's like the fusion of industry and active duty military. That's like a fundamental precept of their entire ethos. Like they don't see any distinction between the commercial sector and between the governmental sector. In fact, they view it as an imperative to fuse those two sectors together. And they'll say that, they'll articulate that. It's like part of you read their like pamphlets and their PowerPoints and stuff, and that's what it says more or less. So they think that's a good thing. They think that's in the national interest. And so I went, but when you go, and I've gone to a few of these, I hadn't been for like a year and a half because of COVID and they weren't being held. But when you go to them, there aren't any, it's amazing. There aren't any journalists there except for a handful of journalists who work for these extremely specialized trade publications. And so it never really penetrates the wider consciousness, what goes on at these conferences. And the one I went to, it was actually in Baltimore 2 weeks ago. It was about chemical and biological warfare. And very conveniently, and you'll like this, guess what now is incorporated into this whole paradigm of chemical and biological warfare as a major opportunity for these firms to center themselves and profit fantastically.
Let me guess. But you tell
Go
me.
ahead.
No, I'm not going to guess. But
I would hope you would get it on the first guess.
I mean,
it's COVID. It's COVID. I mean,
well, of course it's COVID. Yeah, no, I was just thinking what their particular angle on it would be. I mean, would they be hawkish?
Their angle
on China?
is like, well, no, it's not even so much hawkish on China. It's like producing material and equipment and kind of information systems that signifies our readiness to confront threats like this down the line.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Even stuff like we need now to have a whole like sub industry.
Oh Jesus.
Of new gear that's given to our special forces to protect them from like pathogens that along the lines of COVID, because the stuff they had prior to 2020 wasn't sufficient. So I mean, I guess I brought that up to say that there were no journalists there other than me, really, that I could see who have any connection to any outlet other than these very niche specialized trade publications that nobody reads unless you have a direct financial interest in reading them, so that you can be kept abreast on what your next lobbying endeavor is. And so that's a huge systemic fault of the US media. And that's always been the case when I've attended stuff like this.
Yeah.
And they use such arcane language that, it can be hard to even follow at times. But you should have if I was running a newsroom, I would have armies of people going to that stuff.
Totally.
Talking to you can even talk to, talking to the military who are there and the industry people who are there, and like trying to come up with an angle that's resonant with the average reader. But it just doesn't happen.
No.
And so okay, so on the Afghanistan thing, yes, granted, there is that whole sector of American life where the country's industrial base is dependent on these outflows in Afghanistan and elsewhere, for their own financial viability. But at the same time, it's a choice in a way to become beholden to them. Mm-hmm. It's a choice in terms of who you surround yourself with. I mean, Trump chose to surround himself with guys like H.R. McMaster, who are now doing the rounds on the media, denouncing the quote unquote surrender to the Taliban and how, this is going to be a new 9/11. And then he hires John Bolton and all these other people. I mean, those were direct decisions within the president's purview. So I think it can almost be a cop out to say, oh, it's just the military industrial complex. Well, yeah, that's a factor. But as the elected commander in chief, you have the ability and the means to circumvent that if you want to dedicate what's required to actually accomplish that circumvention, and a lot of them just don't care enough to do so.
Sure. Yeah. The military industrial complex would not have on its own made the Iraq war happen. I mean, that was because Bush was in office at that time. Gore might have done it too, but it's because they chose that war. I mean, that was a war that wasn't even in the realm of possibility in the minds of anybody. I think even people at Raytheon or Lockheed Martin weren't thinking about invading and occupying Iraq back in the early 2000s. So the Afghanistan, let's talk about this. What's your take? I'm still trying to figure out what my take is on the withdrawal by Biden. I've gone back and forth on this. At first, I thought it was okay, basically, and now I'm not so sure. Closing the Bagram Air Base before they'd evacuated everybody. I don't even know what to make of that. Like, what are the politics of this? It's a mess, both just on the ground, obviously, but also politically. It's sort of a mess to figure out like what one's position should be. There's anti-war friends of mine who just think it's all very good and the Taliban are nice guys now, and this is just what's going to happen and we should just celebrate it. I think that's what I've heard. And then I follow the MAGA movement. I follow Steve Bannon in the War Room. And of course, as you're saying, they're frothing at the mouth. Oh my God. I mean, you see these right-wing guys on Fox News now cursing on cable news about this. I mean, they are furious. Yeah. And a lot of it that really I respect and it resonates with me is that they are speaking for a base of people, the MAGA crowd, whose sons and daughters are the ones who tend to serve in the military. The MAGA people, I don't know what the numbers are, but I bet you anything that they have the highest rates of enlistment, among people who voted for Trump. And we know that his support in the military is huge. The mother of one of the Marines who was just killed in Colorado. I mean, she was on some talk radio show just blasting Biden. There was a father of a Marine who was killed who was Iranian American. Oh,
this is from California, and he's been laying into Biden as well. And I think he's been on Fox and been making the rounds. Yeah, I was on Fox 10 days ago now or so, making a point that was probably the first and last time that it was aired on Fox on the issue of Afghanistan, which is that I do think a lot of the grandstanding over the operational specifics of the evacuation mission is in bad faith. Like, I don't believe in these sudden humanitarians who are saying that because there's some collateral damage arguably associated with the withdrawal, they're now, filled with such outrage.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I don't believe that if you ignored that civilian casualties have been skyrocketing in just the past couple of years in Afghanistan,
right,
as a result of the warfare in which the United States was a combatant as the trainer and equiper of the Afghan National Army and the security forces. So that never even was something you noticed.
Mm-hmm.
Then this moralizing, I think, is extremely kind of circumstantial, just because it's tied to some sort of narrow parochial domestic political point you can make now against Biden. And, say whatever you will about Biden. I mean, can you recall the last time that a president actually declared a firm date to withdraw fully from a war, not like a fake PR withdrawal?
Yeah.
Not we're just going to like change the nature of the operation like Obama did in 2014, where it's no longer going to be a combat operation, which was a joke. I mean, Craig Whitlock in his new book on the Afghanistan papers basically, rips Obama for in 2014 coming out and giving this new gloss to the intervention in Afghanistan as though it wasn't a war anymore. It was just like a situation where the U.S. military was going to be constantly in warfare-like conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Biden he set a deadline, August 31st, just a few days now, to fully withdraw all troops, and he's doing it, and he's not relenting, even in the case of a gigantic tsunami of pushback. I mean, more than I even personally would have thought was possible under Biden, because generally the disposition of the media under Biden is going to be defend him. I don't know that they're like in love with him or enraptured by him, but because he's the foil against the Republicans and Trumpism, they're going to be de facto in favor of Biden. But I think that's totally changed these past few weeks, and it shows you that, for all what I think is a true critique of the U.S. media as totally in the tank for these kind of culturally liberal nostrums, and how that kind of guides and informs so much of their coverage, and this kind of reflects anti-Trumpism, there is like a bizarrely potent pro-war streak through at least the mainstream corporate media. I mean, liberals. I read the Wall Street among liberals and conservatives. I mean, I read the Wall Street Journal on Friday, and guess who the guest columnist was? Condemning Biden and giving him advice on how he can regain his credibility. Paul Wolfowitz. I mean, it's like a caricature.
Whoa.
And you have these retired generals who were like the architects. And for people who don't know, you talk about architect. Paul Wolfowitz is like known as the quasi-intellectual architect of the Iraq War. I mean, he was he gave like the intellectual so-called justification for that war to Bush administration.
Sure did.
And now he's like been resuscitated and to lecture Biden on credibility issues.
And Bill Kristol's been a regular. Bill Kristol's been a regular on MSNBC for years now. They love him on MSNBC. So I mean, so I have not seen a liberal. Maybe there's some, but I have not seen a liberal not calling for extending the war in Afghanistan. It's from Marianne Williamson, for God's sake, on down. I mean, liberal after liberal after liberal on CNN, New York Times.
Do it for the women.
Right. And so, there's a whole lot to say about that. But I guess what it is to me, it's revealing who liberals always have been, which is partisans of the American empire. I guess. Is that how you read that?
Yeah, but I also wouldn't let conservatives off the hook here. I mean, come on. Kevin McCarthy, who was the House Majority Leader under Trump and is still the House Minority Leader under Trump, still is the House Minority Leader under Biden. He supported the Trump withdrawal plan, meaning he was supportive in theory of all U.S. troops being removed from Afghanistan by May of this year.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, he's criticizing Biden's withdrawal, not just on grounds of execution, like, it could have been handled better. They shouldn't have closed this particular airbase. Although I don't even think those operational quibbles are particularly compelling most of the time.
Right.
He's now saying the U.S. shouldn't have withdrawn at all. And how does that comport with his previous support for Trump's withdrawal plan? I mean, you tell me. But a lot of it, I think, is so politically, so like it's just knee-jerk partisan stuff. And what bothers me so much about this sort of fixation on the operational details, or should they have started evacuating people earlier? Well, number one, I mean, Republicans should get their criticism straight. I mean, I can't tell if they're upset because there are too many people being evacuated or too few. I mean, this is one of the largest evacuation missions ever. But number two, I mean, I think that kind of fixation serves to obscure that the fundamental condition of the Afghanistan intervention was revealed by the withdrawal itself, which is that the Afghan National Army and the security forces collapsed in 11 days with barely firing a shot, notwithstanding the billions and billions of dollars poured in and over 20 years. So that was the fundamental condition. That was the fundamental failed policy that needed at some point to be terminated.
Right.
And so now to get your panties in a bunch, but because the long overdue termination of that policy has unfolded in a way that doesn't have the nicest optics, or has unfolded in a way that is chaotic, is to me is inane. I mean, I see people. I've written about this on Substack. I see people saying with a straight face that this is the worst foreign policy catastrophe in modern American history. And it's just like, okay, so it's a worse catastrophe than escalating the war that everybody who is of any relevance within the U.S. policymaking apparatus knew had failed on a bipartisan basis. It's worse than that. Like, isn't that the far more morally grievous offense than whatever shortcomings might have been involved in the planning of this? Yeah, I mean, I think it obscures way more than what it reveals to get bogged down in these kind of. I'm always fascinated by the people on Twitter who are sudden like experts in Bagram airface like logistical details. Really? Like, so you've been studying this for ages, and like you came to this informed opinion that it should have started in June or whatever. I mean, give me a break. I mean, the reason why I've been sort of defending Biden on this, it's not because I have any affinity for Biden, just because defending the notion of following through and terminating a demonstrably failed policy once and for all.
Yep.
And the fact that he's getting so much pushback and so much condemnation, and his approval rating has actually fallen over the past week or two. I mean, that's a very ominous sign about what the media is capable of if a president actually makes good on a commitment to end a war. Right. Whereas if you start a war, if you bomb places, you get celebrated in the media. Right. And the fact that this could be even the dynamic enveloping Biden, right, who otherwise would be treated with kid gloves, is in a way even more alarming. Right.
So let's break down the players in this. So Kevin McCarthy, I think his flip-flopping on this issue is due to the fact that he's widely known as an unprincipled political hack. I mean, that's how you get to be where he is, right? I mean, that's how you have to be. Just like Nancy Pelosi, she doesn't believe anything deep down. It's pretty clear. She's flip-flopped on all sorts of stuff over the years. That's how you get to be Speaker of the House.
She believes. Wait, no, hold on. I got to interrupt. Nancy Pelosi believes that children are our future.
Oh, does she? Do you think that's like deep down though? Is that a deeply held conviction on her part? You really believe that? Okay.
I think it animates her at her deepest core.
Yeah. So Kevin McCarthy in May, or whenever he endorsed the withdrawal, that's when he was feeling a lot of heat from MAGA, who were about to take over his party and about to dump him. They hate his guts. So I think he was just, because they want withdrawal, they always have. Now with the, I guess, at least optically disastrous withdrawal going on, it's now the winds have changed, right? And so now even the liberal establishment, as you've been saying, is calling for, saying that Biden this is catastrophic. So now I think he's just got his finger in the wind, and he's now playing that game. So, but there's true believers here. Okay. So on the one side, you have liberals. I think they really feel this stuff. I really think they feel awful that the United States is leaving the poor women and girls of Afghanistan to the tender mercies of the Taliban. I think that's true. I think they're stupid and short-sighted, and they don't know history, and they're clearly not anti-war in any meaningful way, and they're suckers for the American empire and all that. But I do think they really believe that. And they think that's why they're consistently across the board calling for the United States to continue this goddamn war, to save those women and girls. Then on the other side, you have MAGA, who I follow very closely these days. And I can just tell you that their position on this is that the United States should absolutely withdraw from Afghanistan, but they just want to do it correctly, in quotes. And they think that, and I agree with you totally, that a lot of the hyperbolic talk about the catastrophe on the ground there is just partisanship. I think you see this as a great opportunity to advance their cause and to put forward the idea of Trump as the strong leader under whom this would never have happened. Sure.
I think I honestly think that's a total deflection, though. I mean, I think, so if Trump had seen through his initial plan, the U.S. would have been out fully by May 1st of this year, right? So what? We're supposed to think that would have gone totally smoothly, and there would have been no problems with like less time to plan?
Totally. I agree.
I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So and you even have like Pompeo going around saying, oh, well, this is totally different than our withdrawal, because our withdrawal would have been conditions based, meaning they never would have done it, because there's always a condition you can point to that supposedly argues against following through on the full withdrawal. Yeah. So I think they're kind of admitting, even as they make these execution related arguments, or they make they quibble with the details of how it was done, like embedded within that logic is an admission that they just wouldn't have ended the war at all.
Yeah. I got to say, though, the MAGA people are very consistent on withdrawal. They have always been and still are entirely for withdrawing completely from Afghanistan. They just don't want to do it today, and they want to do it with, they want to make sure it's as safe as can be for the U.S. and its allies. But
that's always the argument, more or less, that pro-war people have made for why deployment should be extended.
Are you suggesting that MAGA and Trump want to stay in Afghanistan permanently?
I'm suggesting that the clear implication of what Trump and Pompeo and a lot of people online that inundate me have said is that they would have just indefinitely delayed the full withdrawal that they claim that they want on the basis of supposed conditions that would have never been met. I mean, the foundational condition in Afghanistan was that the security forces were so fictitious that they collapsed in a blink of an eye, right? So if you do withdraw, then clearly that collapse is going to happen one way or another, and there's going to be this chaos that they claim that they're so aggrieved by, right? So I mean, so this idea that somehow all this like magical constellation of conditions ever would have come together, and then it would have been a great time to withdraw, and there would have been no problems. Yeah, that's fantasy talk. And I do think Pompeo has more or less admitted that the U.S. never would have withdrawn because they would have invoked at the last minute, like this condition not supposedly having been met.
Yeah.
No. So yeah, I think probably on principle, a lot of them would like to withdraw from Afghanistan. But if that's your true principle, then I think you have to bake into that an acknowledgement that ending a war that was predicated on fallacies and was fatally flawed is not going to be like all roses and cupcakes.
Gotcha. No, I agree with that. I agree with that very much. I just think it is their heart, though. I think that's what's in their heart. I mean, I have heard over the last couple of weeks, probably a dozen, at least, of the very best, most impassioned anti-war speeches I've ever heard in my whole life as a lifetime anti-war person. And all of those came from people who voted for Donald Trump. Tucker Carlson, just last week, he had one of his shows. I forget which one it was. He had, I think, like 5 or 6 people on to talk about Afghanistan. And it was just one hair-raising anti-war speech. I mean, that was so perfectly delivered and heartfelt. And also, by the way, took into account the whole history of the war, not just the last couple of weeks.
Well, yeah, that might have been the show that I was on. It was
your buddy Glenn Greenwald. Yeah.
Okay.
I think they may have cut to your Tucker Carlson Today clip in there during that.
Yeah, baby.
But you didn't talk about Afghanistan.
Okay.
So, but yeah, no, it was an amazing thing. And these were like retired generals. This was like Joe Kent, who's running on the MAGA platform in Washington for Congress. It was people like that, people who, have been sort of the devil in my view for a long, long time. And I have not heard impassioned anti-war speeches from people on the left. That's what I know.
Perhaps not. Look, I mean, I'm not,
Yeah.
but I do think there is some irony. I mean, I think a lot of the rush on the part of MAGA people to come up with something that they claim that they're so furious about with respect to the Afghanistan withdrawal is, in a way, their inability to grapple with the fact that Biden is the one who actually carried out the thing that they claim that they were so in favor of, and Trump, delayed it, and he got, blocked by Congress, and it just never happened really, because I think it's harder to do it within the context of the Republican Party coalition, given that like the generic Republican is still, I mean, they might have rebranded somewhat, but they would be perfectly at home in like 2004.
Yeah.
In the Bush-led party.
Yeah.
Even if they said that they're America first. I mean, that could mean anything to anyone.
Yeah. I basically agree with you. Okay, let's talk about the Democrats. So speaking of excellent independent journalism and journalism of the new media variety, which doesn't necessarily require calling people on the phone, but nonetheless breaks information that people otherwise don't know about. Your recent piece, you have a few pieces, but there was one in particular on Andrew Cuomo, I thought was just outstanding journalism. And it was not particularly long. This was on Substack a couple of weeks ago, I think. And I had been following the story like a lot of people, pretty closely, hating Andrew Cuomo with all my heart, like a lot of people, and believing that the accusations of sexual harassment were not only probably bullshit, but of course the exact wrong reason to be deposing the guy. So, but you made it much even worse. I mean, I realized you showed just by looking at documents, some, I think, government documents, some just rereading interviews with the key players. You showed that it was even worse and deeper than even I expected. So can you just talk about what you discovered about what this was actually about, the whole Attorney General's investigation and her claim about what happened, and then the accusers, and can you just go through that? It's really remarkable set of just reporting.
Yeah, well, thanks. I mean, this whole ordeal is truly one of the most shocking examples of media malpractice that I can recall.
Yeah,
and it's ironic that the victim of it is Andrew Cuomo, because. Exactly. And I actually do think, as weird as it is to say, I do think he is a victim in that he was just the target of an incredibly malicious and factually deficient political campaign. I mean, I think what a lot of it boils down to is that Cuomo, for good and bad reasons, many good, but some bad, had generated a lot of resentment among factions of the Democratic Party in New York, including the more energized and visible and vocal, quote unquote, progressive faction, which gained a lot of momentum in 2018, even as Cuomo also himself won re-election in 2018. And that animus had been festering for quite a while. And there was a desire to oust him, because if he had run for governor again in 2022, very good chance he wins the Democratic primary in 2022, and New York has no term limits for its governorship, so he could have basically continued forever probably, and so they had to find like an almost extra legal way to depose him. And what's most shocking to me is how the media. I mean, it's funny because you would think that Cuomo would be someone that they rush to the defense of, right? Because of the role he played during COVID, where he was like the hero and Trump was the villain or whatever. But that really all fell by the wayside. And the way to make that fall by the wayside, even with the kind of pent up reputational cachet that somebody like Cuomo has, is just to introduce this whole dimension of supposed sexual misconduct and then, forget it. The slate is wiped clean. And the amazing thing to me is that a lot of my initial suspicions about the probable probable illegitimacy of a lot of these accusations against him were validated simply by reading the publicly available documents. I mean, all you had to do was go through the Attorney General's report. I mean, Letitia James, earlier this month, the Attorney General of New York put out this report that went through in like meticulous detail all the alleged allegations of sexual misconduct against Cuomo, and a lot of them are just farcical. I mean, there was one where a doctor at a public press conference during COVID was administering a COVID nasal swab test to Cuomo, and Cuomo said to her, because she was in her full gown garb, said to her, "Oh, you make that gown look good." It was like he was like basically endorsing personal protective equipment, and nobody like raised an eye about it. And then all of a sudden, a year and a half later, that gets into a report where this becomes the 11th accuser. And I think the whole point, one of the primary objectives of this campaign against Cuomo was to maximize the quantity of accusers. Because most normal people, when they hear about this kind of casually, they say, "Oh, maybe if there was one or two accusers, I might give them the benefit of the doubt. But 11, gee whiz, where there's smoke, there's fire." Well, I think the people who orchestrated this campaign against Cuomo understood that, which is why they maximized the number of accusers that could be lumped into this, nice figure of 11, even if 10 of the 11 didn't even allege any kind of actual physical sexual assault.
God.
And the one person who does allege actual sexual assault, I mean, there's some questionable stuff around her as well. Mm-hmm. Cuomo's people adamantly they claim that she outright fabricated that allegation. I mean, they can see that he might have done some of the stuff, but it was just misconstrued. That one they outright claim was fabricated. So, but what really drew my attention to this was that initially you have the ball got rolling when the first accuser comes out and, of course, does the obligatory Twitter thread where she's making very vague accusations, more about like a toxic workplace almost than where she felt like she wasn't appreciated, and there was like a insinuation of something sexually exploitive there, but it was incredibly vague, right? And then so the accuser, a few months later, accuser number 2 comes in, and I maintain that this is the most important accuser because where there's smoke, there's fire, right? I mean, to get the snowball rolling down the hill, you have to have that second person come in, right? So the second person's name is Charlotte Bennett.
Yep.
And her marquee allegation is that she was, quote, groomed by Andrew Cuomo.
I love it.
While working in the governor's mansion. And so she's taken a concept which ordinarily applies to children being illicitly predated upon by adults to kind of habituate them into being receptive to sexual overtures. She's taken that now and put it in the context of a professional political operative working in the governor's mansion, supposedly being groomed. And she doesn't allege that Cuomo did anything physical to her. She alleges that she had like these like metaphysical capacities to understand, to like mind read him and know that he was trying to get her to become receptive to sex, even though he never said anything like that. He asked her at one point, are you? They essentially had discussions about her advocacy in this sexual assault survivors group at Hamilton College, which she had recently graduated from, and so he was having sort of like weirdly personal conversations with her, probably on the misbegotten premise that he could like help her or something. Sort of weird. I mean, he's in his third term, gets more oblivious, gets more kind of lazy and unscrupulous, right? And it turns out that if Charlotte Bennett's background had been at all even probed, I mean, if anybody in the New York media had indicated even the slightest interest in doing simple journalistic inquiry, then I think this entire story would have been framed radically differently. Charlotte Bennett, who came out and gave credence to the first accuser as accuser number 2, said she was groomed, said that he made all these kind of comments to her in order to get her to become receptive for sex. She was named pseudonymously in a lawsuit in 2000 that was settled against Hamilton College in 2017, where she's referred to by the moniker Sally Smith because of the protocols around whether or not you name like alleged victims of sexual violence. And
oh man,
and it turns out that she withdrew. This is according to the lawsuit, right? And they won't comment to me. I asked Charlotte Bennett and her lawyer for comment. They won't reply to me. But she's referred to in this lawsuit as having coordinated with another quote unquote accuser to not to get their accusations established in any kind of adversarial setting or to get to confirm the truth of their accusations, but to obtain the short-term remedy of getting a certain male student expelled from campus.
Wow.
And they did that. The guy gets expelled from campus. He's barred from graduation activities, barred from doing anything associated with the college toward the end of his senior year.
God.
He was in the same class as Charlotte Bennett,
God.
graduating in 2017.
God.
And then later on, once the objective is already accomplished, she then is confronted with evidence that she's on some sort of audio recording from a few years earlier, admitting that this allegation she now says was abusive or misconduct was consensual.
Amazing.
So that comes out after the fact. She then has to withdraw this allegation at the college.
Amazing.
But guess what? Doesn't matter because they already got the guy expelled.
That's right.
They accomplished what they set out to accomplish. She's then because of all the the protocols around survivors, she's then not even named in the subsequent lawsuit that is then settled confidentially. So she incurred no cost for doing this. But the crazy part is then she orchestrates this campaign against Cuomo that is strikingly reminiscent of the tactics she successfully employed at Hamilton College by coordinating with other accusers. She freely admitted on CBS, Charlotte Bennett, that she was in contact with the first accuser, Lindsay Boylan, over DMs and other messages on how to best maximize, from a PR standpoint, the accusations they're making and to gather new accusers to fortify one another and achieve the goal of ousting Cuomo. So it was incredible. I mean, the tactics that were pioneered by this advocate at Hamilton College, a liberal arts college that cost like $65,000 a year, they got then seamlessly imported into the governor's mansion. And then the dominoes fall once you have accuser number 2, and then others come. And then like the one thing the media doesn't do, they don't even scrutinize who the accusers are. They don't say, oh, accuser number 4, this must mean that there's really something to this. Well, accuser number 4 comes out and says that she has a photo of her and Cuomo like in an embrace that was taken 5 years ago that she's had hanging in her office because she's proud that it suggests that she had professional proximity to Cuomo and it helps her in her further endeavors as some kind of political hack.
Oh my God.
She, because of these other allegations that other women have put forward, now she's reinterpreted that photo in a vastly different light, and she believes that she's the victim of some kind of misconduct, and on and on and on like that until Cuomo has to accede to this commencement of an attorney general investigation presided over by Letitia James, who clearly is going to be running for governor in 2022, and he's using this as a launch pad. Zero doubt about that.
Okay.
Just like Cuomo actually did in a way when he was New York attorney general and had to investigate David Patterson.
Oh yeah, right.
And she says in her press conference that the purpose, I mean, she makes a political, basically, declaration that's in the guise of some kind of legal communique. She says that the purpose of this investigation was to demonstrate that her office, Letitia James's office, as a matter of policy, believes women. So as a matter of policy, we are all now mandated to believe like this convoluted interpretive paradigm of Charlotte Bennett, who thinks that she, as a 25-year-old political operative, can be groomed by a fellow adult and not just can't be subjected to any kind of inquiry at all. And also, I mean, she does something which I think is truly unprecedented in the annals of American due process, which is she comes out and just declares that Cuomo violated multiple state and federal laws. But then she insists that there's no further prosecutorial action that she's obliged to take to actually prove that in court. So imagine that, just a prosecutor getting before the TV cameras and just decreeing that you or I or anyone, governor or not, violated the law. And then they don't actually have to prove that. They could just wash their hands of it, move away, and then the political damage is done and, mission accomplished. I mean, there's so much here that is just ludicrous, but because Cuomo is viewed with a lot of antagonism within progressive media, viewed with a lot of, obviously, antagonism within conservative media, and more the liberal media, like the Standard, New York Times or whatever, they follow the lead of the progressive media. There wasn't really any constituency within the media to even do basic due diligence on this story. And so it fell to me to find this Hamilton College lawsuit stuff as regards the most significant accuser. And then guess what? It turns out that, the Cuomo lawyers themselves hadn't found that until I found it. And I'm sure they got paid a whole lot more money than I did. Yeah. And by the time this came across their transom, it was too late. And he had already kind of committed himself to resigning. So, I mean, the whole thing is just a total joke.
There's so many things to say about that, and we just don't have time because I was kind of in the middle of the sexual assault hysteria on college campuses that started about 6 years ago. Yeah, now America is finding out about what's been going on college campuses because those kids have graduated and now hold positions of power in government. Exactly. Like, it's not just Charlotte Bennett and her compatriots, but it's people like AOC, who were in college not long ago, learning, drinking in all that stuff that I and my colleagues are teaching them, unfortunately.
Well, I'm only 1 year older than AOC, so I'm disturbed to be lumped into her kind of generational cohort on these matters, but you're probably right.
I am definitely right, because I used to teach them. I used to teach hundreds of AOCs and Charlotte Bennett's. I know exactly this dynamic, this pattern.
Obviously it was a colossal error of judgment on Cuomo's part to ever surround himself with people of that mindset in his close kind of semi-intimate proximity. Right. So in a way, I guess you could say he had it coming, but that doesn't obviate the responsibility of the media to actually attempt some kind of impartial evaluation of these allegations. That just was not done. I mean, the New York Times, the day Cuomo officially announced his resignation, they had it splashed on their homepage, and this is in the Substack post. They had it splashed on their homepage that the Attorney General had found 11 credible accusations of sexual assault, not misconduct, not harassment, assault. And that's just so far removed from the facts at hand that I think he would have a legitimate case for libel. I mean, that's classic libel.
Yeah, it is.
I think it probably was done maliciously. So, I mean, I would hope that, no brief for Cuomo, but I would love to see him actually sue the New York Times and have that litigated and see what the outcome is, because how can you just get away with that? It's insane.
Good Lord have mercy. And I despise Andrew Cuomo. I mean, I despise that guy on every level, but I would stand up 100% on his behalf on this particular fight, because I despise people losing their careers over, false accusations. I despise journalists not doing the due diligence that you did. I despise treating women like girls, which is what these women asked for by saying that they were groomed as if they were children.
Yeah.
It's, it's feminism, it's Puritanism masquerading as feminism, which is actually anti-feminist. And that's my view.
No, I mean, I agree. I mean, but unfortunately, it seems like nobody in the media was interested in compartmentalizing whatever other beliefs or opinions or notions they have about Andrew Cuomo, and at least trying to do something impartial. This is why I talk about not having any real fondness for those sort of old-fashioned, fantasies of journalistic objectivity. But there is something to be said for having this sort of facility of impartiality that you can draw on and set aside your immediate passions and political biases to kind of best convey the true facts.
Well, how about just skepticism?
That was totally missing in this case.
Just skepticism. Just skepticism. That's all we need, right? Just skepticism.
I spoke in the Substack article, or not in the Substack article, I did a Tablet magazine piece as well. I talked to a professor of criminal procedure at Pace University, who's an expert on New York state law, who says who said he can recall no precedent whatsoever for what Letitia James did. Not with regard to just the governor, with anybody ever.
Wow.
And it's just like, shouldn't that at least have been noted somewhere in the popular media? Or just do we have to accept that New York media just become these vessels and PR agents for supposed accusers? On the day that Cuomo actually finally left office last week, the New York City and New York State media got into a whole frenzy about me. They were lashing out and attacking me because some of the Cuomo aides, were circulating my story. I mean, and so therefore it was just assumed that there must have been an oppo dump that they for some reason chose to give to me as like a last ditch effort to keep him in office. That's not what happened at all. And but I think there is this creeping feeling amongst at least some of the media that they so egregiously mishandled this. I mean, like it or not, Cuomo was elected in 2018. I mean, I've never been a fan of the guy politically or personally. I used to try to get people to call him Emperor Cuomo because of his like megalomaniacal governing style. Emperor Cuomo II, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
And
exactly.
And never caught on. But at the same time, it's so much worse, at least from a journalistic standpoint, to just give lazy credence to this whole crusade that I don't think will at all stand up to even the most basic scrutiny in the future, if anybody bothers to examine it again, which I hope they do, because this stuff, the reason why one should be concerned about this stuff isn't about the specific individual. It's because the same tactics gain widespread acceptance and can be deployed in all manner of circumstances, including potentially to you.
I mean, this was a highly popular governor. Highly popular. He was the star of the Democratic Party. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris weren't the stars. It was Andrew Cuomo, who everybody was talking about. Everybody loved him, and they took him down this easily with that. That can happen to you or me really fast. So here's the one thing I'm just slightly confused about. So you're saying it was essentially a power play by the progressive left in New York, led by Letitia James, or at least she's the figurehead of the progressive left. So is that because Cuomo wasn't left wing enough for them? Is that why they hated him?
Yeah. And, for a long time, Cuomo, in order to like maintain power in the state governmental system in New York, never perceived it in his interest to actually have a fully unified Democratic controlled legislature. So he was perfectly content with Republicans controlling like the state Senate for the longest time and so on and so forth, because that meant that he could be like the kingmaker, and after 2018, the legislature became came under unified Democratic control, and he was a long-standing enemy of theirs. I mean, he was always, even prior to 2018, he was always had friction with like the Working Families Party, which is this like sort of insignificant minor party in New York.
Very progressive party. It's this left wing.
Yeah, I mean, they actually endorsed Cuomo in 2014.
Did they?
I was at their convention in Albany where he beamed in and gave this cursory and dismissive endorsement speech. He didn't even bother showing up in person, even in Albany. So it showed you how highly he thought of them.
Right.
But they endorsed him because deals were struck and whatnot. So ultimately they wanted him out. I think, and because now they have like a potted plant in Kathy Hochul, the new governor, who I don't think is going to have any kind of wherewithal to push back at all on like the progressive Democratic agenda legislatively. If you want New York to just be a progressive bastion, it makes sense from like a standpoint of realpolitik to get rid of Cuomo by whatever means necessary. But it doesn't mean that journalists should sign up for that as though it's credible. Regardless of how progressive, quote unquote, you may or may not be. And Letitia James, now she's now the Cuomo slayer. She got rid of him. She exposed him supposedly as a serial abuser.
Yep.
And she's going to be the front runner for the Democratic nomination for governor in 2022. So yeah, I do think a lot of it was a power play. Not it's and there was coordination between some of these players. It doesn't mean that it was in every sense like organized from a central location or something, but the factors kind of congealed such that this was the mechanism settled upon to achieve what couldn't have been done electorally, which was get rid of Cuomo from within the Democratic Party.
Right. It's stunning and horrifying, even though it's Andrew Cuomo who's gotten taken down. And there's
yeah. Sorry, I could go on forever.
Yeah, no. Well, yeah.
Crazy. I mean, people, please try at least try to be a little bit objective in your evaluation of this story. Read my Substack, read my tablet magazine thing, and contemplate whether you think this is a societally healthy precedent to have been entrenched. Because it shows that within the Democratic Party, all you need to do to get what you want is to come up with accusations of a sexual nature, no matter how flimsy.
Exactly.
And if you can just create the impression that where there's smoke, there's fire. That's the way to get what you want within the progressive movement now. And you see this replicated across so many different contexts within like the left-wing firmament, within activist groups, within, like I did this after autopsy of the Bernie Sanders campaign in 2020. Turns out in South Carolina, which was the most pivotal state in the Democratic primary, which Bernie Sanders got blown out, even though he, claimed that he was going to have this, retail politics masterclass and converting Black Southern voters to his cause. That campaign operation in South Carolina was thrown into total disarray. For what reason? Well, because somebody made an accusation about something, and therefore there was nobody with any kind of sense who was running the campaign there, and he got blown out. And like the one opportunity that socialists were so passionate about to actually get potentially a self-identified socialist into the White House was ruined because of arguably this total pathology within progressive circles, whereby any political endeavor, any candidate, anybody can just be ruined with one fell swoop if you can coordinate something and then get the media lapdogs to buy into your totally bogus interpretation of the facts at hand.
It is weaponized puritanical feminism. And I don't see the end of it. What will happen now that we've allowed this to go on? Not just allowed it, we encourage it. We cheer it on. We make them into heroes. So if you want to take someone down and you're a woman, you can do this very easily. And it's been done with many very powerful people, not just Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah, and it's crazy because like the first accuser in this Cuomo saga, Lindsey Boylan, she was a politician running. Did I say this already? Because I've talked about this a lot with a lot of people. But yeah. Tell me if I'm repeating myself. She was a politician when she first put out that Twitter thread. She was running for elected office. She was running for Manhattan Borough president. Okay, and yet she got depicted as though she were just this benign accuser who materialized out of thin air and had suddenly this urgent information to relay to the public. So all she was just presented as this accuser rather than a politician who clearly made a political calculation that would be in her interests to make these claims. And therefore should have been the claims like should be subject to scrutiny anyway. But much more so if they're coming from a fellow politician, right? You think, but it wasn't done.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah. And the thing is that most of the men who've been taken down have been what? They've been liberal politicians and Hollywood actors and producers, right? It's been liberals who have mostly been taken down. So they're destroying their own people, I guess. I don't know what they want from this, but it seems to be metastasizing, and I don't see a way to stop the spread of this cancer. And it's just gonna destroy like institutions like the Bernie Sanders campaign. I mean, right there. I mean, that's incredible. Why is that good for them to take down the Bernie Sanders campaign?
I mean, I don't see a way to curtail the spread of it either. I mean, this whole Cuomo fracas was like the cherry on top. I mean, if it could be done in this scenario, then it can be done in any scenario. And the worst part of it, the most discreditable part of it, is the lack of any even interest on the part of the media to provide even the beginnings of like a counterweight.
Right.
if only just by like reading the relevant documents
Right.
and like reporting on them and asking like the actors here to like provide some comment. Like it wouldn't require like this intrepid investigative journalism. I didn't do intrepid investigative journalism on this.
Right.
I just like tried to maintain ties to like some baseline of common sense.
I'm going to put the link to that piece, Substack and Tablet, in the show notes for this, because everyone needs to read that. It won't take, like 5 minutes to read it, 10 minutes to read it. It's pretty quick, but it's packed with stuff. And it's like, everything is just mind blowing to me. And this is, as again, someone who hated Andrew Cuomo, who didn't believe the stuff to begin with. I was already skeptical, highly skeptical. It was so much deeper based on your reporting. This is why I say you're the last journalist, Michael.
Thank you. Only living boy in New York. I'm gonna pay somebody to re-record a new rendition of that just to boost my ego, which sometimes flags under the assault of my Twitter antagonists.
You got it. My pleasure. All right. Last thing I want to talk about with you is maybe the biggest thing, at least from your point of view, probably from my point of view too, and it concerns journalism. The suppression of information and points of view by social media corporations on their platforms. First of all, do you call that censorship? Would you call that censorship, or is it something else?
I don't think it particularly matters what you call it. I mean, To me, it seems censorship works in a colloquial sense. I mean, people will nitpick and say that, it's not the government doing it, so it's not censorship. Well, I mean, it's a stifling of information in the public domain. So call it what you want. It's bad, whatever term you ascribe. But clearly, it's done at the behest.
I was going to say the government is doing it. The government is doing it.
They're doing it indirectly, or sometimes even directly. Yeah. So I think censorship is definitely the correct framing for it, even if it's not like literally or legally applicable in every discrete instance. But yeah, I mean, I think if you're supposedly in violation of like CDC guidelines, and your behavior is reported to the social media companies with the intention of seeing to it that you are expelled from those platforms, then I think that's that's some version of censorship, isn't it?
Yeah.
Either way, let's say it's not censorship. Either way, it's bad, because it means that increasingly arbitrary criteria are being imposed on these realms in which public discussion is increasingly had, to make it so that if you violate whatever the current consensus is, then you stand to have your account totally purged. And I think a lot of one thing that I've been totally wrong about in the past few years, and I've actually mentioned this on occasion, is when Milo Yiannopoulos was first banned from Twitter and then had his book deal revoked and stuff. I said, you know what? This actually plays right into his hands, because now he's a big victim, right? And he can actually monetize that even further. And maybe this actually gives him more momentum. Well, I mean, maybe I'm extrapolating too much from his individual case, but I think actually deplatforming is really effective. Like it really does shut you off from a lot of the outside world, particularly if you're in media. I mean, try to run any kind of media operation with yourself totally prohibited from accessing social media channels. Got to be pretty difficult, I would think. Yeah. I think the deplatforming or purging or censorship, it actually works, which is why it's being used more and more aggressively to determine the confines of what is considered acceptable online.
Yeah. I mean, it looks like Milo's career is effectively over. I mean, what I've seen, occasional reports from him, talking about how broke he is and how desperate he is and how miserable he is. And you don't see him anywhere. You just don't see him in the news anymore. So I don't think he's not giving big talks on college campuses anymore. He's not giving speaking tours, dangerous faggot speaking tours anymore, or anything like that. So I think it did work. It did destroy him. And it's pretty remarkable. To me, if the government brings you to Capitol Hill and makes you sit in the Senate chamber or Senate hearing room, and you have senators telling you, Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey, that if you don't do X, Y, or Z, if you don't take these people offline, there will be some consequences for you. How is that not counted as censorship? I mean, it should be. That's the definition of censorship should include that. Don't you think?
I think maybe, the quibble would be because you can't directly attribute any one instance of censorship to like a directive by the government. But again, it almost doesn't matter because the government intentionally set out, meaning senators and members of the House and their lackeys in the media. They set out after 2016 to blame Trump on an excessively open internet.
Right.
And therefore, those CEOs were hauled before Congress and upbraided for not stringently monitoring the flow of information on their platforms enough. And that way lies the danger of somehow, a candidate gaining momentum and gaining support of like trolls or whatever, such that they needed to crack down. I mean, that's more or less what happened. And a lot of it really derives from Russiagate, because they were saying, we are applying the full force of our oversight capacity on you, the big tech companies, to make it so that we never have a recurrence of the supposed Russian interference again, because look at the political ramifications of that. Look at what it gave us, Trump. And they took that to heart. And you saw that later on when they actually did change their policies very concretely in 2020, such that you had that whole episode of the Hunter Biden laptop reporting being suppressed because it was claimed that it had its genesis in some kind of Russian disinformation campaign. Now, did those companies want to get hauled back before Congress and explain why they didn't act on the supposedly, urgent intel that the Russians were once again interfering? I mean, their stock price might have gone down again. I mean, they would have been persona non grata again. And so they instituted policies in accordance with the government's demands and acted upon it. And it works. So yeah, I mean, I think whatever you want to call it precisely, it's definitely a reflection of how these kind of different actors in society can kind of congeal around a certain idea of what needs to be done to prevent an unfavorable or inconvenient political outcome. And these are like the second and third order effects of it. So it's almost worse than censorship if it happens in a way that can't be, tangibly attributed to some kind of, executive branch official sending an order to ban this or that person. If it happens organically because of, or quasi-organically because of the conditions that have been created and the incentives that are operative, that in a way is even worse, because it's a lot of people with autonomy acting on their own accord to stifle opinions and reporting and any other material that they feel is somehow anathema.
100%. Yes, sir. What are you black pilled or white pilled about this? Do you think there will be new opening in the media and social media with maybe the advent of new platforms, or is it just going to continue to descend into totalitarian nightmares?
I guess I would say that I'm gray pilled, like somewhere in between.
Yeah.
Because, sometimes I'll meet people or I'll get emails from people and they'll say, "Oh, weren't you canceled? I hope everything's going okay for you." And just like, no, sir or madam, I really never was canceled. Or if I was canceled, then I don't know what definition of cancellation you're using, because right. I've gotten more opportunity, notwithstanding the fury that I've engendered over the past couple of years. I've got more opportunity than I ever had. Substack is working out great for me. I also have do stuff with this online video platform called Rockfin, which is actually backed by cryptocurrency in some way that I'm still unable to competently explain. And so, I have plenty of opportunities, and I think my reach is bigger than ever. So to kind of sell myself as canceled would be a lie, because clearly, or at least it wouldn't be intelligible per my own self-conception, because for all the completely insufferable uniformity of opinion that's always on display within corporate media and whatever slant it has on this or that day, clearly there's a market opening up for different forms and modes of reportage and analysis and such. Substack being foremost among them. So to me, I view all these dynamics really as an opportunity to cultivate a wider audience, which is what I've done. And so I think in aggregate, it's bad for society and the country and probably the world that the media behaves in this way. But on a personal level, almost maybe selfishly, it kind of works to my advantage because I can operate in a way where I'm not beholden to them and yet be sustainable and have some influence, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, you and Glenn Greenwald have very large audiences. So that's the biggest reason to be white-pilled, I would think. It's been demonstrated that there is a market for what you do, for what I consider to be real journalism. Thank God. Now, we don't know if it's a majority or will ever become a majority, but it's certainly a significant minority, enough to make noise and enough for people to make a living doing what you do, which is the most important thing. Thank God.
Yeah, exactly. So Michael, I can't complain.
Yeah. So are you M Tracy on Twitter? Is that right?
Yeah. MTRACEY.
Your Twitter is essential. Everyone listening or watching, if you don't already, and you probably do, but follow Michael M Tracy on Twitter. It's essential reading in my view. And then Michael Tracy on Substack. There's no fancy name. It's just Michael Tracy, right?
Yeah. Just mtracy.substack. And also, like I said, on the video platform, Rockfin, yeah, which seems to be gaining some momentum. You have other guys on it, like Max Blumenthal, who I don't know how you feel about him, but he, at the very least, independent-minded.
Definitely.
So it's just another venue to kind of get stuff out there that's not, in any way kind of tethered to these sort of mainstream sources of consensus and conformity.
Max and I have differences, but I definitely respect him as a journalist and essentially an independent journalist. Yes. So everyone knows what to do. Follow this man, keep journalism alive. And Mike, I guess now, Mr. Tracy.
Either way,
Mr. Tracy, I appreciate you so much. And thank you for coming on again.
Just call me sir or Lord.
Yes, sir. You got it. Anything for you. All right, man. Thanks.
Oh yeah. Good talking to you.
Yeah.
This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. To join the new Renegade University, go to renegadeuniversity.com. To join the new Unregistered Underground, the supporting listeners group for the podcast, go to unregisteredunderground.com. Thanks for listening.